Today's video, I talked to Alex Manners. Alex is a neurodiversity and autism speaker and has spoken at many events and companies such as Lloyds Banking, British Heart Foundation and Coca-Cola. Today I asked him what it was like growing up, what it was like getting a diagnosis and what he thinks needs to improve. Hey guys, and welcome to episode 2 of series 5 of the Autism Connections. And as you can see by my intro, please welcome today's guest, Alex Manners. So Alex, obviously thank you for coming on the Autism Connections this year. I start every series with, for us it's probably the obvious sort of answer, but what is your connection to autism?
So I was diagnosed with what was known as Asperger's syndrome when I was 10 years old. So back when I was in primary school. So yeah, I've got Asperger's, a form of autism.
Did you find the diagnosis stage sort of hard to get that diagnosis? Because like oftentimes now it's like a 4-year waiting list and stupid times like that.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it took me about a year from when we first started out with trying to get the diagnosis to when I was actually diagnosed, which seems a long length of time. But as you say, compared to a lot of people and a lot of my friends who took 3 or 4 years to get the diagnosis, it actually wasn't too long a time for me to actually get that diagnosis. But I actually kind of funnily quite enjoyed the process of being diagnosed. I think one of the reasons I enjoyed it was because school for me was a really stressful place. And whenever I was having to go for different meetings and assessments, I was being taken out of school. So I think that's one of the reasons why I enjoyed the diagnosis process.
It makes sense actually, because you're escaping that environment, right? That you're not comfortable in. There's no adaptations being made. When you got the diagnosis, do you feel things were put in place to help you, or do you think it was still not quite where it needed to be?
I think, getting that diagnosis meant that I was entitled to support in school. Even though I got supported in school, it was really difficult to get that support. My dad had to do a tremendous amount of fighting just to get me the support that I received. So in my primary school, I did receive quite a bit of support, but it was only because my dad was persistent and really, really fought for what he thought I needed, and not just what I needed, but what I was entitled to because of that statement um, of Asperger's that I had. When I went to secondary school, because I'd already been diagnosed, I was able to go to a smaller independent school that had more support in place for people like myself. So that school was a lot more supportive. And I still didn't really like school, but that school I found was a lot more supportive than my primary school. But, it was still, even in secondary school, sometimes it was a battle just to get me the support that I needed and was entitled to.
And what sort of things did help when you were in primary school? Those sort of reasonable adjustments that they put in. What sort of things helped you?
So one thing that they did that was really helpful was they gave me what was we called a timeout, where basically I had three little counters in my pocket, and whenever I was feeling really stressed or needed to leave the classroom, I could go to my teacher, give her one of the counters, and then she then knew that I was going to go out of the class to a quiet place just for 5 or 10 minutes. That was really helpful. And one of the teachers, my special interest is football, and one of the teachers made me three little, almost like match attack football cards with pictures of footballers on and motivational quotes. And sometimes just being able to look at those, because I used to keep them in my pocket, just being able to look at those often stopped me from needing to have a timeout. So they were fantastic. And I think the other thing that was really helpful was I met with the Senko for 5 minutes every morning and before the end of every day. I probably needed longer with her, to be honest, just because of the amount of things that were going on. But especially the morning session I used to have with her, that was really, really helpful every morning.
No, I think that's key because you're getting to know that person, you're building that communication, that trust up with them as well. Instead of seeing a Senko every month who you don't really know, you don't really see regularly.
Yeah, that's right. She was really one of the only people in the school in my primary school that I felt comfortable enough to actually talk to and tell my worries to. So yeah, it was great that I had someone there who I knew I could go to.
And did you find secondary school just as supporting, or because I know a lot of the time, well, in my case, when I went from primary school, don't get me wrong, there was not a lot of teachers that understood me, but I think because of how everything was size wise, classroom size, and you're in the same classroom, you've got the same books, you've got the same pens, and suddenly you go off to secondary school and it's like it's a whole new world. So when you made that step, did you find the support was just as good, or did you find it harder transitioning up?
I actually feel like I had the opposite experience to most people because I went from a school that had sort of 30 in a class to going to a really small independent school where in most of my classes there were 7 or 8 people, and the most I had in any class was I think 15. So in secondary school, my classes halved or even went down by a third of the number of pupils in each class. And because it was a school that had more support in place for people like myself, I think in the school there were about 15% of the pupils in the school had a form of autism or a diagnosis. So there were a lot more teachers there that understood autism, that understood Asperger's, um, and could support us better. In my primary school, I felt like a lot of the teachers had preconceived ideas about what autism and what Asperger's was. And to me, it felt like I didn't fit into those preconceived ideas, so they didn't really understand what was going wrong, why I was struggling so much. And it also, I know that it felt to me like they didn't want to put the things in place that I needed because it wasn't fair on the other people in my class that I got these extra things being put in place for me and no one else did. So for me, I know the transition from primary to secondary school can be really difficult for people with, well, anyone really, but specifically for those with autism. But for me, I think I hated my primary school so much that I was just so pleased to get out of it. I just didn't really care where I was going, to be honest. I just wanted to get out of it.
I suppose that's what the major benefit was to your statement as well, right? That diagnosis to be able to send you somewhere that could help you and would make you feel more comfortable in.
Yeah, it really was. I mean, I always say that school used to feel like a prison. Um, and definitely it did in primary school and it did in secondary school as well. But it wasn't quite so bad when I first started secondary school because, as I say, I just wanted to get out of that environment of my primary school that I really, really hated going into every day. So, but yeah, having that diagnosis early meant that I could go to this school that was a lot more supportive.
What was the sort of I always sort of say foundation blocks, but what was the sort of thing that made your dad want to get that diagnosis? Was it that, because I couldn't talk till I was 6, clearly make up for it now. Um, but was there something like that with yourself, that your dad just thought, right, I think he's autistic?
Yeah, it was, well, when I was younger, nothing was right, everything was wrong. The world to me was really, really confusing, and I was always complaining about different things. Even when my mum used to walk with us to school, there was like a very, very slight incline on the way to school. And I used to get so annoyed about this hill that we had to walk up, even though it is not a hill whatsoever. It's like the tiniest of inclines in the road. But I used to get so annoyed with this that I once actually wrote a letter to the Prime Minister to try and ban hills
Wow,
because
I love it.
the world was just so confusing. Everything was wrong. And I think that was one of the first inclinations that they had that I might be different. Um, and it was only when we went on holiday to visit some friends in America, they had a son that had been diagnosed with Asperger's, and it was them that first recognised that I might have it as well because they could see some of the similarities in me that their son had, and it was them that first said to my parents and my grandma, I think Alex might have the same as my son. He might have Asperger's or autism. But yeah, definitely when I was younger, the first sort of signs that I might be different was because just nothing was right. Everything was so confusing for me.
It's really fascinating because, yeah, there's similar things like even now, in work life, I have to constantly remember that, yeah, I'm a bit different to other people, and the way that I might perceive things may be a whole lot different to someone else. But Speaking of work, how is that sort of translated into work life as well? Because, I know the Robert Buckland review came out this week around employment. I think it's 30% of autistic people are in any form of work, which is still a shocking statistic. It should be a lot higher. But how's that sort of translated for you from going from school to into a work environment?
I think I've been very lucky that right from when I was first diagnosed, my dad told me that my Asperger's was a positive thing that gave me special powers. So yes, there has been a lot of challenges, but I've always sort of viewed my Asperger's as something positive and something that I feel lucky to have been able to manage throughout, the past 27 years. And I think that translated when I finished school. My dad always told me to do something that I enjoyed and to try and pursue my passions. So I've always done things and worked for myself since leaving school. So I started off, I was really interested. Well, I wanted, when I first left school in sixth form, I wanted to become a TV presenter. So that led me to then start talking about autism, talking about Asperger's on radio, on television. And I enjoyed doing it so much. I enjoyed being able to share my story with others so much that I then decided I'd seen a few people presenting talks on their autism in front of large groups of people, and I thought, wow, I would absolutely love to be able to do that. So that's what led me to sort of doing what I am today, presenting talks to loads of different companies and schools. It's because a lot of my friends just wouldn't have the confidence to stand up and speak in front of large groups of people, or wouldn't be able to sort of confidently talk about their experiences of living with autism. And because I can, I always say I want to use that superpower, being able to stand up and speak in front of large groups of people, to inspire and educate other people. And I absolutely love what I'm doing. So since leaving school, I've always really done things and worked for myself.
Yeah, and honestly, you've done like amazingly well. Like I've been there while you've been speaking at the autism show, and I know you've even wrote a book as well, which is amazing. Yeah, it's just spreading that message and that awareness, and I think you've got such a knack for it. You do such a good job. And you're right. There's so many people I know where it's like yeah, the thought of getting on a stage, absolutely frightens them, and it's also almost against every stereotype of an autistic person, right? Like you wouldn't expect an autistic person to be able to do that, so it's so great to see people like yourself doing it and doing it so well.
Really is. Like I say, so many of my friends wouldn't be able to. But the thing is, people with autism, I always say they have such great skills that are often being overlooked in the workplace. Like that stat that you gave about the number of people in employment is just terrible. And it's not because we don't have the skills to be in employment. We have such great skills. It's just that sometimes interview process is not inclusive, is not appropriate for us, and often the workplace isn't as supportive as we might hope.
No, I completely agree. A lot of employers even admitted that they wouldn't hire someone with autism because they didn't know how to support them. And it's like, well, honestly, I know since joining where I work, I'd say the admin's a lot better, the attention to detail's a lot better, just because, as you say, that's sort of the superpower of it, is that's what I'm really good at. Don't get me wrong, I can drive myself mad some days and think, oh God, I'm focusing way too much on this. Um, but you're right, that is in itself something that a lot of people just can't do.
No, I totally agree.
So with all that as well, obviously, you've done a lot of stuff with television and radio. So I did happen to see on your Twitter you took part in the Undateables as well. How was that sort of experience for you?
I really enjoyed being on the shows. It was funny because I didn't actually apply to go on the show. One of the producers actually saw an article I'd written for, I think, a local magazine and got in touch with me online and said they wanted to have a chat with me. And then once they had a chat, they then basically just asked me if I wanted to go on the show. And I went on the show. I went on 2 episodes. Really, really enjoyed it. For me, I think the filming, I was quite used to filming and being filmed. So actually having a camera in front of me didn't bother me at all. I think the weirdest thing about the whole shows was actually knowing, because the first show I went on, the last bit they filmed was the actual date that I went on. And that was the first proper date I'd ever really had.
Yeah.
So the weirdest thing about the whole show was knowing that everyone I'd ever met and everyone in my family and all my friends could watch my first ever date, which doesn't really happen to most people.
No.
So that was the weirdest thing about the shows, but it was a really enjoyable show to go on, definitely, which is why I went on a second time.
I've just again, it might just be being a little bit pedantic, but I've just never liked the name. That's the only thing I don't like about it because it's just like there's so many people on there. I know the irony is there's so many people on there that are dateable, um, but that's the only thing I don't like about it. It's just the name. I wish it was just called
Yeah,
Dateables, right?
yeah. To be honest, quite a lot of people say that. I mean, I've had that quite a lot of times said to me about the name of it. But to be honest, they do it deliberately to get people talking because they told me once they deliberately use
True.
the name Undateables because it gets people talking about the show, and even if they're talking about it in a negative way, they're still talking about the show.
It's true, and they're still raising that awareness, which is so needed, and that representation that is so lackluster on television. I think it's got better, but there's still so much to do, which is why any opportunity you get, it's a blessing really, to have that representation. Do you feel, I mean, a bit of a question autistic to another autistic or Asperger's person, but do you find you worry about what you say, in terms of language and how to say it? Because that's one of the things I always worry about is I never want to offend someone or say the wrong thing. So how do you sort of manage that, and how do you feel about that?
I mean, I don't normally worry about what I say to different people because I'm the type of person who just says what I'm thinking. So I'm very, very literal. Um, in the past, and often I'll say things before I even think about them. Um, and in the past, I know my mum and dad have just said to me, "Oh, I don't think you should have said that to someone." And I'm like, "But it was the truth." And they were like, "Yeah, we know it's the truth, but it might have hurt their feelings or made them a bit annoyed." And after they've explained it to me, I'm like, "Yeah, I can see why that might have done." But at the time, because it was the truth, it was a literal thing to say. I just said it as literal and didn't really think too much about it. So I know in the past it has slipped me up once or twice, just because I'm very, very literal and take things very literally. But I don't think about it too much. I think the only thing I would say about communication is a lot of idioms and phrases that they do confuse me. Although I now know what a lot of them mean, people have explained them to me. Even when they say one of those idioms or phrases, like my granddad on the golf course, he's always saying things like, "Oh, you didn't hit that cleanly," and I'm like, "Well, if I didn't hit it, then how come it went down the fairway down there?" Um, and even though I know what it means now because he said it so many times, the literal meaning still is the first thing I think of. I'd say that's probably the only thing that confuses me on a sort of a regular basis.
It's funny you say that because when I was in school, a teacher asked us all to write down 1 to 7, and everyone else wrote down, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3, and I was the only one in the room that actually wrote 1, 2, 7. I took it literally. I was just like, well, that's what you've asked,
That's
right?
what you said, yeah.
Yeah, and it's yeah, still to this day. And it can be embarrassing because when you're working, as you get older, I don't know, there's such an expectation of the world that it's like, well, you should know that. And it's like, well, no, I don't, and that's all right. But you do have those sort of times with people. And how have you sort of combated that with where people just don't get it or don't understand?
I mean, there's a lot of people I've met. I mean, I'm fortunate that my family are really supportive, and most people I meet are very supportive. And especially because I work in the autism industry, I'm always meeting people who want to know more about autism, want to learn more about neurodiversity, and they're very sort of understanding towards people with autism and who are neurodiverse. But I have or met or come across a few people who maybe aren't as understanding. And to me, I always say, all I can do is try and give them a little bit of knowledge about what autism is, what it's like to live with. If they still don't understand after that, then that's nothing on me. That's maybe they just don't want to understand. Maybe they just have heard other things and don't want to believe what I'm saying. But once or twice, yeah, I have had people who don't understand it, and I always look upon it as I can try my best to try and give them a few um, facts about what autism is, because a lot of the time, people who don't understand it, I feel it's because they've got those sort of autism myths in their head that a lot of people believe that are true that actually aren't true. You know, like autism is only a male condition, or people grow out of autism in adulthood, which, as we know, are both false. But
Yeah,
maybe a lot of people still have those preconceived ideas around them. But all I can do is try and educate people on, what is actually the true facts.
I think you're spot on. There are just so many myths and stereotypes out there. I always say, like, there's always a stereotype that there's every autistic person's great at maths, right? And I'm like, trust me, you wouldn't want me doing your accounts,
No, nor me. I'm terrible.
you know, being caught very quickly. um, but then, hey, your special interest is football, right? My special interest has always been wrestling, and I still get people sort of even with that come up to me and go, "Oh, but it's not real, right? It's fake," and it's like, yeah. Why do you still watch it? It's like, well, why do you watch every film? Why do you watch any TV show? Because you enjoy it. Um, but yeah, people are so quick to judge on that. Um, I've even had people sort of go, "Well, you can't be autistic. You look me in the eye when you're talking." It's like, yeah, because hey, some people can, some people can't. It's crazy how people still think of in those sort of older ways.
Yeah. And like you said about the looking people in the eye, I've had that so many times where people say to me, "Oh, you don't look autistic. You can have a conversation with me absolutely fine." I'm like, autism is not a physical disability, it's a hidden disability. So what does autism even look like? How am I supposed to look autistic? And secondly, I always use the saying, once you've met one autistic person, you've met one autistic person, because everyone with it is so different. So yes, there are a lot of similar traits that many of us will have, but even with those traits, they vary so differently from one person to the next. I always use the story that ticking clocks drive me insane. But one of my friends with autism finds the sound of ticking clocks really, really soothing. So it just goes to show how everyone is so different.
I have to say, I'll probably join you on that one. It probably would drive me mad, to be honest.
Yeah.
But yeah, I can see that absolutely. I suppose my last question would be, and it's a bit of a hard one to answer, always is. But if you had to give your best explanation of what is autism, how would you explain it to those who may have never heard about it or are just hearing about it? What would be your sort of your best explanation?
So I would always say that autism is a hidden disability that affects how we communicate with others and how we make sense of the world around us. Everyone with autism is completely different, and it's something that people will have for the rest of their lives. There are many common traits that people may have with autism, and these include things such as a love of routine, taking things literally, difficulties with understanding communication, understanding idioms, phrases, body language. We can be over or undersensitive to many sensory issues, high levels of stress, and often we can have highly focused interests.
That's a really that's a bit better explanation of yeah. Well, yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, it's
Yeah, I've rehearsed it a few times.
that's good though. I'm a bit speechless with that, but yeah, I mean, it's so hard to try and explain it to people, but I think what you've just said it hits on those sort of points of you know you can be oversensitive, undersensitive, because that's another thing people don't get understand is you could be right on the other scale of it, right? So no, I think what you said was spot on. But thank you ever so much for coming on and telling us your story and giving us your knowledge. It's been brilliant.
No, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed speaking to you.